Hi everyone, I'm going to show my approach to doing a value study. I'm going to be painting a mug, just a basic subject. The purpose of these is basically to figure out where you want to save your whites. And in this photo I see a little white there, a little white on that lip, a highlight catching there, a highlight here as well. And while you can see a little bouncing light or reflected light down here, that's not a highlight or white, so I'm going to paint right through that in my first layer. So everything is going to be painted right through except for what is white, which I'll be leaving, like I said, around that lip, a little bit over here. And then what I'll do in the end too is probably lift a little bit down here. It doesn't really show up too well in the print, but there's a little bit of reflected light coming off the surface of the table here, so keep that in mind as well. Here's an example of what we'll be looking at. These are very quick pencil sketches. Like I said, I just want to recognize kind of where the shadows are. And these are just almost like a no tan, basically just the light and dark. And there will be a middle value, like you see here. And this is basically what we're going for. You can see where I saved the highlight there and there. I didn't really worry about lifting too much out here, but a little highlight on the handle here. And obviously the shadows. The shadows will show form, light direction with the cast shadow. But that's basically what we're going for. These will take maybe 30 seconds each, and the value study at this size, just a couple minutes at the most, maybe 5 at the most. You want to use a color that will get a nice dark value. I'm going to use Neutral Tint. You can also use Indigo, which is what I used in this one here. But just to mix it up, I'll use a different color today, and I have some Neutral Tint in my palette, so I'll use that. And I'm basically going to start out by mixing up a big puddle. I want to get a mid value, and so more water. I'll just use a scrap piece of paper and test it. Let's see. It looks probably darker on the camera than it is in person, but I'll add a little more water and lighten it up a little bit more. I'm just spraying that out of a spray bottle. I've got that ready to go. I'm gonna go ahead and do just some quick sketches here. These don't need to be very big at all. They just want to do kind of get an idea of where we want to save the whites. And so basic mug shape. I try and keep in mind perspective, even something like this. This oval will be a shallower oval than what you'll see here. And then the handle, just something like that. And so the focus here is the shadow. So shadow here, shadow on this side, cast shadow at the bottom, a little here. It's the shadow being cast because the light is coming from this direction. So shadow inside the cup, a little shadow on the handle. There's a form shadow here. Shadow inside the handle, and then the cast shadow. And that's basically all we need. And just because you can never have too much practice, I'll do it again. Basic mug shape. Handle. Important thing is the shadows. And I'm just looking back at the reference. Shadow, 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 more shadow, more shadow, and then the cast. I know when I do the value study at a slightly larger size, I'll be saving some reflected light down in the bottom of the handle there. But just to give you an idea, that's really all we need for that. And that's just a way of identifying where the shadows are, light direction, and that's part of the process of observing the subject. I'll do the face a little larger, do a better drawing. Again, doesn't have to be exact. So there. And then the cast shadow will be somewhere in there. So all we're doing in this version, where we're actually painting, and again I'm using neutral tint, I'm going to paint everything except for the whites. I'm going to paint around the whites because we know that this is going to be a mid value, and when we go in with the shadows, we'll be doing wet and wet with a thicker mix of more pigment, less water. But for now, and I'm using number 16, a Skoda Pearl. It's synthetic, but for this size, it'll hold enough to let me get pretty good coverage. But it's about doing this quickly, painting around. Doesn't need to be exact because this isn't going to be a finished painting. It's just helping us identify lights, shadows, midtones, and observing the subject. So again, I can paint through that. I want to save a highlight there, and then another highlight on this side. All of this can be painted through. I might leave a little bit of a highlight on this edge as well, just to define it. And that's pretty much enough for that. And now I want a little highlight here on this side of the handle. And a little highlight here on the top part of the handle. But the rest of it can get painted through. Can paint through all that. Again, just saving a little highlight there. And I can paint right through the bottom of the handle. And I'm just going to paint right through all this. I'll leave a little something here just to define that corner. Little highlight. And I can tell this is drying very fast, so I'm going to spritz it a little bit just so I can keep working with it. And now I'm going to go straight into the thick paint. Very little water, basically just the water was in the brush already, but very thick paint. And so now I can put in shadow on this side. Don't need a shadow there. There's a shadow on the handle here. And I'm going, make sure the paint's thick enough that it's a little wet and moving a little bit, but that's fine. I want a shadow on the inside of the mug here. Or the inside of the handle, I mean. And then there's just a big form shadow on this side. And just quick, suggestive brush strokes. And I want to make sure I'm going to go back in for even thicker paint with a little bit less water. Because for this shadow, I want to be able to maintain some control and keep a little bit of an edge. It's not critical in both sides, but a little bit of an edge just to define the bottom of that handle. And so I'll make sure it's not moving too much. And I'm just going to leave a little bit of a gap. And then come up to the base of the mug. And that's pretty much all shadow in there. That's kind of what we need. Got a little loose on the top there, but that's fine. I can go back in after if I need to and lift or whatever. But for a value study, like I said, it's really just about saving the whites, recognizing the shadows, which will give you the form. A little wet and wet practice because we're working quick. We don't need to spend a lot of time on these, but that's basically all we need. I had also mentioned that I could do a little lifting down here to show the reflected light on the surface of the table, which will help define that corner or that edge of the mug. I'm going to use a smaller brush. It's just number 10 Princeton Neptune. Take most of the water out. So I have a damp brush. And I'm just going to lift a little bit. Clean the brush, clean water, and I'm just kind of drying it with my hand a little bit. And then come in and lift. And I can do the same in here, which is getting kind of picky, but just to give you an example, if you've lost a highlight that you want to save, and I can tell that's still pretty wet, but and just lift a little bit out right there. And so that just shows that you've got a little highlight on both sides of that handle. Again, not critical, but just to give you an example of a little lifting you can do if you want to go back and save more of a highlight.